Hi there, everybody. Welcome to our first episode in the installment of 3 about a history of slavery in Haiti. And in this first episode, we're going to kind of dive into what it means for the history of slavery in Haiti, what slavery looked like in Haiti, how it came about, that sort of thing. So first, I want to start off with speaking about how we don't really think about Haiti when we think about slavery for the most part. I feel like that's the pretty common opinion. A lot of people, when they hear about slavery, they tend to think of the United States, the American Civil War. They tend to think about American media, American cinema that's been produced about slavery in America. And while slavery was obviously a very widespread thing, with the Atlantic slave trade being global, not just to the southern U.S., it really wasn't talked about that much with Haiti. We don't hear that much about it when we hear of Haitian slavery in the way that we don't usually hear about Haitian slavery. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about with Haitian slavery, but it's not really a mainstream topic or nowhere near the scale of what we'd see with slavery in the U.S. So yeah, that's really the first part about it, is that we don't really hear about this. And I think it's important to hear about it because really it had a much bigger impact on the global slave trading scale than what most people think. So to begin, Haiti was officially deemed a colony of France in 1697. So France moved in, they imposed their ways of life, they imposed really Western ways of life, kind of how other Eastern European countries and North American countries were operating. They had over a century of control while they were in Haiti. And at this time, I'll note that at the time France was in Haiti, it wasn't called Haiti, it was called Saint Domingue. And yeah, that was the name at the time. I'm going to refer to it as Haiti just because that is now the modern day name. But at the time, this was Saint Domingue, the colony of France. So when France moved in the late 17th century, they began to impose their ways of life. And that just doesn't mean culture as in popular culture, media culture, food, language, that kind of thing. It also means slavery. Because at the time, the Atlantic slave trade was really near its peak around the end of the 17th century and during the 18th century. This was when millions upon millions of Africans were being displaced and millions of people across the globe were essentially being told, hey, your rights are gone. You have nothing in the eyes of our government. You are property. You're here to serve us. That is your purpose. And this was obviously extremely damaging to the populations because their ways of life, everything that they had known, how they operated, was gone. It was done, and out of nowhere, it was, okay, that's it. You have no say in how your life goes. You have no say in how you operate. You are going to work for this person until you die, which for many people was not a long time, sadly. And at the time in Haiti, while France was occupying Haiti and it was a colony of France, the population split was massive. So there were about 560,000 people in Haiti around the time during the 18th century. That's around the numbers that we have. And in this 560,000, there were approximately 30,000 white colonists, 30,000 free black colonists, and 500,000 slaves. That is a huge difference. So essentially 90% of the population was enslaved, and really 5% of the population controlled everything that happened there. And I say 5% because although there were absolutely free black colonists, often referred to at the time as mulattoes because they were often mixed race, mulattoes did not have the same type of privileges and control that white colonists did. And that's because they were essentially viewed as not black enough to be slaves, but not white enough to have the same rights as white colonists, which is obviously a terrible thing for these people, but it is how things worked at the time. But really, with 90% of that population being enslaved, it left such room and such a possibility for some kind of uprising. Because really, unless nations were going to start sending their entire militaries or entire navies to Haiti, there's really almost no shot that 30,000 people can fend off 500,000. Like, that's really not possible. So I think that that is extremely important to note. And so how slavery was justified in Haiti was really quite similar to how it was justified across the world at the time. And that is through religion. Really, what happened was when these European nations arrived in these smaller nations is they kind of gave them Christianity. They gave them Christianity in the way of they introduced them to the teachings of the Bible. They introduced them to Jesus Christ. And what a big thing that they hit on was that they introduced them to eternal life through Christ. And since they had introduced them to eternal life through Christ, essentially this was such a fantastic gift in their eyes that the natives who lived there were forever indebted to them. Essentially, they could do anything they want, but since they had given them the gift of eternal life through Christ, they were almost repaying them. And they were forever indebted to them for this fantastic deed that they had done to them. That was the idea at the time. And another prominent idea, and we actually see this in one of our other lessons centered around the American Civil War, is the idea of kind of like a natural order. And we see when Reverend Palmer discussed that it was the natural will of God for these people to be enslaved, because if it wasn't the natural will of God, why would he have put these people in a tropical place with harsh outdoor conditions and given them the ability to deal with these conditions in harsh work environments? Why would he have done that if it wasn't eventually meaning that they would be enslaved to help other people reach their goals, financial goals, crop growing goals, whatever that may be? Why would he have placed these people in these geographical locations if he wasn't prepping them for this kind of work? And those two were two very prominent ideas at the time. While the second one is definitely more so just humans twisting religion to fit their narrative, it was still a very popular opinion that was shared by many people at the time, not just Reverend Palmer. And this also ties into the idea of the natural hierarchy, one of the first things we saw in this course, where people who lived in England were just told, you have to do what the king, what the queen, what the monarchy is telling you to do, because that is the natural hierarchy. You were meant to be born into this role. That is where you are. That is where you will stay. This is a very similar thing in terms of if you are a slave, that was meant to be your role, and you are meant to help other people reach their goals because that is the will of God. So that's kind of a couple of concepts in this course coming into one. And Haiti was an absolutely massive piece for France. While Haiti was a colony of France, it was the most profitable colony on the planet. While Haiti is very small in size, it meant huge things, not just for France, but on a global scale. And that's because Haiti's main export was sugar and coffee. Mainly sugar. Coffee grew more inland, so it could be harder to reach. It was tougher to get to the coast. Sugar was the biggest thing, and that's because every culture on the planet wanted sugar, especially those in Europe, whether it was for sweetening their drinks, making some kind of baked goods, anything it was needed. People wanted it. And that made Haiti irreplaceable for France while it was a colony. They made France so much money and gave them so much power in terms of France controlling the biggest exporter profitable wise in the world, that it was just unmatched by anybody else. So although Haiti was quite small in size, it meant huge things. And obviously, while it did give France quite an upper hand profit wise, it was huge on a global scale because all these other countries were getting their sugar from Haiti. So although they weren't necessarily profiting from it, they still needed what Haiti was giving. And although slavery was such a prominent thing in Haiti, obviously with 90% of the population being enslaved, it really wasn't spoken about that much to people outside of Haiti. We see in a lot of our images in our lessons how Haiti is portrayed as almost like a tropical paradise. It is portrayed as the land of milk and honey. It is portrayed as, hey, this place is kind of ripe for the taking. and you can go, and it's tropical, it's lovely weather, it's a paradise, there's so much fertile land, there's so much potential. That's what it was advertised as. Really, slavery was only mentioned in these advertisements when it was something along the lines of there's 50 acres of land here, and there's also 500 slaves that come with it. They were advertised as a commodity. They weren't spoken about that much, but when they were spoken about, it was a commodity. It was never diving into what it looked like. It was more so advertised as almost equipment going along with the purchase, which obviously is a very messed up thing, but at the time, that's just how it was portrayed. And yeah, so that is kind of the pretext for how slavery looked in Haiti. It was a massive slave population. Haiti was a huge piece of France's trading. It was a massive piece of the entire goods trade across the world because it had such huge export numbers. And yeah, so that's kind of what it looked like. And then our next episode is going to focus on why eventually we saw a revolt with slavery. Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 2 of our podcast about the impacts of slavery in Haiti, how it ended, and how it affected the rest of the world. So in our first episode, we covered what slavery looked like in Haiti, the history of Haiti, how it came to be occupied by the French, and all that sort of thing. So now that we've learned about slavery in Haiti, we need to learn about the overthrow, the rebellion. We need to learn about what happened and how Haiti came to be the only successful slave revolt in history, the only successful slave revolt that resulted in an entire nation becoming free under its own governing body. So around this time, around the end of the 18th century, going into the 9th century, slavery started to become less popular. And by less popular, I mean that our previous reasons that we had discussed justifying slavery, like religion and the ideas tied around how it was God's will, started to become less popular. People didn't really agree with them. People thought that it was just people twisting religion to fit their narrative. They started to think that it was more of to use, I guess, in more simple wording, that it was messed up. They thought that it shouldn't be happening. They thought that it wasn't a great thing to do. And Christians who had previously been saying that this was a good thing, that it was a natural thing, that it was a gift from God, had started to shift more towards the idea of everyone is created equal and enslaving other humans who were also created by God. That's not equality. That's not equality at all. And this is backed up by one of the pieces of information we have in this course is the citation of Sublimis Deus, which was a document put out by the Pope, which essentially said slavery is not a religion approved thing. It's not a Christianity approved practice. Everybody is created equal in the eyes of God, and to say that slavery is something promoted by God, that's something that God would have wanted, that's not true. It's not a good thing. It is a sinful thing to do. You are taking away the rights of other people. They were also created equally by God. That shouldn't be happening. And this sentiment kind of spread. It started to become less popular. And so that is kind of what was happening on a global scale, but more centralized to Haiti. What started to happen was a lot of the free black colonists, or as they were referred to, mulattoes at the time, as we previously discussed, what started to happen was they were finding unrest, as although they were free, they weren't being given the same rights as the white colonists. As we had previously discussed, they weren't white enough to have the same rights that white colonists did. And after a while, at this point, it had been approximately a century, nearing a century from when France took over, it was really starting to wear on them that like they were being treated so poorly. So when the French Revolution happened in France, and we started to see the establishment more so of government, more so of democracy, more so of councils, of multiple people coming together to make decisions, not just one monarch figure going, hey, this is the lay of the land. Now that there was more opportunity for debate and change, many of the free black colonists in Haiti started to think, okay, well, this is a chance to create change. This is a chance to make the change that we have been looking for so very long. And these issues were presented to the National Assembly in France, the idea of abolishing slavery, the idea of establishing rights for every person in Haiti. And the National Assembly thought about it. They kind of conversed a little bit on it. And eventually what ended up happening was they made the decree of the rights of the man and the citizen. And this essentially guaranteed rights to every citizen of France. And the thing was that this didn't necessarily have to apply to French colonies. Well, yes, it was in France. French colonies were a bit of a different story. And also, these decrees did not specifically mention slaves or free black colonists. It was more so for white colonists living in France. It didn't necessarily go, hey, anyone who is enslaved or anyone who's facing discrimination in French colonies now has the same thing as the white colonists. That is not what it did. And when more and more people started learning of other people being given these rights that could not be taken away from them, and they were still struggling, they were still being oppressed, all of these factors coming together, they were still facing such an uphill battle. Eventually, they were getting sick of it. And more social unrest started to happen. People started to become afraid of revolts, as we previously discussed in our last episode, with the slave population being so much larger than the population which was in control. People started to become afraid. They were going, oh no, like they were wildly outnumbered. So there was a huge possibility for an uprising. And even in Auger, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, even with Auger's letters that he sent to French officials and to French courts, he started saying that unrest was becoming more and more widespread. It wasn't just small groups of people. It wasn't just little sentiments being partially shared. More and more people were starting to go like, okay, it's obvious no one's going to stand up for us. We've been waiting for too long now. No one else is going to do it for us. We're going to have to do it for ourselves. And he was warning French officials of this, saying like, hey, you could have a full-scale rebellion on your hands of over 500,000 people if you don't do something about this. He was warning that they were going to lose the colony altogether if nothing was done. And still, even with more and more change coming in France and decrees being given to ensure rights and freedoms to some people, obviously slavery had not disappeared, and the free black colonists were not receiving the rights and the opportunities that others were, and they had had enough. So finally, what ended up happening was things like slaves started to go on strike almost. They kind of in mass refused to work. Whatever their jobs were, whatever they were supposed to be doing, they would go, no. And huge numbers of them started doing it. They started saying that this was ridiculous, that this was like, really, this is to be left in the past. There was no reason to keep on doing this. That even they were starting to say there's no way Christianity can define this, because at this point they had been taught Christianity for over 100 years at this point. So they were going, listen, everything that you've been teaching us that's justifying your cause, it's actually not. It's kind of justifying our cause of wanting to be equal. And so we started to see uprisings, and these strikes eventually started to turn violent, because what happened with these strikes is that the French government tried to make examples. They would have public executions. They would, of course, have intense physical punishments for any of those uprisings. But eventually this was no longer enough to deter people from uprising. Slaves and free black colonists eventually accepted, like, hey, there may be some deaths, we may suffer some losses, but this is going to be for the good, not only of us, but for our future generations. And they full on revolted. There was years on years of bloodshed, battles, people being killed, tons and tons and tons of loss. But at the end of it, Although in the early 1800s, like 1801, 1802, Napoleon did actually send French military regiments to Haiti to try and counteract this, they were not successful. And Toussaint Louverture, I hope I'm saying that correctly, was a huge leader of the Haitian Revolution. He kind of led many rebels, and he was a huge voice, kind of almost stirring up the troops in a way, kind of keeping them motivated and helping them take on the French. And he was a huge part in them eventually defeating Napoleon's army. And although he was eventually sent back to France and executed for what he did, really what he did was a huge part in Haiti's success. And so eventually in 1804, Haiti declared itself a free colony. They were no longer under French control. What was previously a governing body by the French of white colonists was now a native black government ran by those who had previously been oppressed or enslaved, and they now had their own control over their own country. And this was huge. This had never happened before. The world had never seen anything like this. They had fought back against the mother country and won. This was unheard of at the time. So this massive revolt ended up proving successful. Although there were tens of thousands of lives lost, it eventually became successful. And the people of Haiti showed the world something that they had never seen. And in our next episode, we're going to discuss why this sent such waves through the global community. Hi there. Welcome back to the third episode of our podcast about the history of slavery in Haiti and its rebellion and what that did for the world. So in our first two episodes, we covered what slavery looked like in Haiti, what the French occupation of Haiti looked like, how that came to be, and we looked at what led to the rebellion, what happened in the rebellion, the massive, massive outburst of hundreds of thousands of people that were involved in this rebellion, the bloodshed, the everything. And now I want to go into the significance of these events, because these events sent waves through the world. These were not just events that made officials in France upset. These were not just events that did good things for those who were being oppressed in Haiti. They did so much more on a global scale. And it's really important that we look at that, because to not look at the ripple effect that this sent through the world would really be overlooking such a huge part of why this is important. It is important, obviously, because so many people gain freedom, so many people gain the ability to do things that they could never do before, but also on a global scale, this was massive. As I had previously said in one of our previous episodes, this is the only fully successful slave revolt in history. There has not been another slave revolt which completely resulted in a new government, new control, no longer being controlled by the parent country, anything like that. This is the only example of such a huge success. Although great sacrifice was needed to get to this point, it was a massive success, and it is really the only one of its kind that we can see. Although there have been other small-scale rebellions which have yielded success, an entire nation flipping its whole governmental system, getting away from the nation that had colonized and oppressed it. There's nothing like this. So a big part of the Haitian Revolution, as I said multiple times, people being freed, all that sort of thing, but it sent ripples through the world in terms of, I guess in the first term I want to look at is fear. And the reason why I want to speak about the fear that it sent through the world is because many people looked at what had happened in Haiti, seen that massive slave population eventually be able to just overthrow their owners, whether it be through violence, through mass protests, anything that it had to be, they were able to do it. And images that were clearly painted by French white colonists that were clearly depicting slaves as like devilish, kind of leaving out the part that they had been enslaved for so long that they were finally fighting back. They just painted them as these savages who were bloodthirsty and going for revenge. And so when images of the revolution came out and people saw images of slaves murdering their owners, being brutal to their owners as the owners had been to them, this sparked fear through a lot of the world. This was not just sort of a, oh, well, that sucks that happened to them sort of thing. This was a, oh, if that happened there, that could happen here. And this started to strike a lot of fear into many slave owners. Many slave owners feared rebellion, and not just, oh, well, I'll lose really property, I'll lose tools to farm. They were afraid of being killed by their slaves. And with these images coming out of the brutal murders and brutal fighting back of the slaves, it wasn't far-fetched for these owners to believe that the same thing could happen with them. And so this fear spread throughout the world. And it was a fear that people hadn't seen before, because although people started to question what if slaves start to find in mass unrest, this was unrest coming to fruition. Before, it was just kind of a what if or small scale. This was a large scale. And now people were afraid because they saw that it was possible. And another thing of how this greatly changed how the world operated, honestly, I know that's a very large thing to say, but really this did have a massive impact on how things operated, because this started happening. So as I previously mentioned, slavery was on the decline. And I mean, like, the popularity, I'll say, of slavery, the ethicalness of it was on its way down. All of these reasons people had before of justifying slavery, everything they had before of saying why it was good, people were starting to be against that. There were multiple religious groups for the abolition of slavery. They believed it was a grave sin. They believed there was no way to justify it. And what was once the factor for justifying slavery, which is religion, started to become one of the biggest opponents of slavery. It started to become one of the biggest things that said this is not okay, because people started to think, oh, unless I think about this in a way that I want it to benefit me, it's not actually fair. And of course, when people had looked at it through the scope of trying to benefit themselves, that they were slave owners, it was easy to twist religion. But now when people were starting to analyze it closer, they were like, this doesn't seem to make sense, that somehow in religion, all people are created equal through God, yet somehow some people are just allowed to be enslaved and beaten and murdered because they're different. People started to go, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And then with this decline, and then with the Haitian Revolution, slavery became less popular to the point where other countries were like, oh, we should stop doing this. We should get rid of slavery. Not only is it an immoral thing to do, but they see the uprising in Haiti and they think, well, France must have taken a massive financial hit. That was a big thing for France. And then they completely lost control of their colony. They were no longer able to profit from it anything. They lost control. They essentially had a limb cut off because, as previously discussed, Haiti was hugely profitable for them. And now it's gone. And other countries didn't want that happening to them. They didn't all of a sudden want huge industries that their nation's economy relied on to just disappear because of slave revolts. So they started to abolish slavery. Britain abolished slavery in the early to mid 19th century. Other countries in Europe followed suit. And then what happened with that is not only was slavery abolished, but slave-based economies started to dissolve. The slave trade, building the slave ships, transporting slaves, the slave auctioning companies, the slave selling companies, anything like this, these industries started to dry up. And very soon it started to become really, the U.S. was one of the only nations left in the West that still fully embraced slavery by the mid-19th century. And people in the U.S., obviously we all know there was a big divide in opinion, largely between the North and the South. And this grew and grew and grew until, of course, the American Civil War. But a lot of this was started with Haiti because people were afraid of slave rebellion, and then this triggered a huge dissolving of slave-based economies. And yeah, people were afraid of what could have happened, especially when you saw these photos of such brutality happening. It showed that it was possible, and before it was only a fear. It had never been materialized. Now this fear had been materialized, people had a lot more fear, because really now it was a possibility, and it wasn't just a what if, it was a when. There was no more what if this happens. It was, okay, this has happened there, it's going to happen here, it's only a matter of time before it happens here. And then that's why so many nations started to abolish it, because they didn't want to get to that point. And then, as we all know, eventually the U.S. outlawed slavery as well. So Haiti and that Haitian Revolution and that huge rebellion really struck fear across the world, and yeah, it just really showed that what people had spoken about but not really fully wrapped their head around was possible, and it risked massive financial loss. So people wanted to get ahead of the curve while they still could. And yeah, that was pretty hugely significant, because it kind of altered the world's economy, and of course put millions on millions of slaves into freedom, and hugely altered the lives and futures of millions of people.